There is a kind of tired that goes beyond the body. It lives in your eyes. It slows your voice. It follows you to bed and is already waiting when you wake up. It is the tired of someone who has been carrying too much for too long, alone, with no sign that anything is about to get easier. I know that tired. I lived inside it for 2 years. My name is Serena. I am a mother of 2. And for 24 months of my life, I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over my children's heads, a roof that belonged to a man who watched me struggle and said nothing, did nothing, and collected his money every single month without once asking if we were okay. I am not telling this story to make anyone feel sorry for me. I have no interest in that. I am telling it because I want you to understand what it looks like when a woman decides she has had enough. Not in anger. Not in bitterness. But in that quiet, powerful way that changes things permanently. This is what happened. And this is what I learned about people, both the ones who watch you drown and the ones who, without any reason, reach into the water. I grew up in Cincinnati. My mother was a practical woman who raised me and my brother largely on her own after our father left when I was 9. She worked. She budgeted. She made things stretch. She never complained in front of us, and she never let us feel poor even when we were. I think about her a lot when I think about those 2 years. I married at 26. His name was Derek. He was charming and funny and made everything feel easier than it had ever been. We had our son, Noah, first. Then our daughter, Chloe. For a while, things were exactly what I had hoped for. Then the marriage fell apart. I won't spend much time on why. The short version is that Derek was better at starting things than maintaining them. By the time Chloe was 2 and Noah was 5, we were separated, and he had moved to Atlanta for work and sent money when he remembered and called even less. I was left in our rented house in Columbus with 2 children, one income from a part-time bookkeeping job, and a landlord named Frank Bellamy who owned 6 properties in the neighborhood and collected rent on the first of every month without exception. The house was old and drafty and had a heating issue that Frank had been meaning to fix for almost a year. But it was ours. And we stayed. The bookkeeping job paid reasonably for part-time work, but it wasn't enough. Not even close. After rent, utilities, groceries, and the basics for the kids, I was running out of money 2 weeks before the end of each month. I borrowed from my mother once. I felt ashamed of it in a way I couldn't fully explain. She had given so much already, and I was 31 years old, and I had wanted so badly to be the kind of person who didn't need to ask. She gave it without hesitation and told me never to apologize for needing help. But I still lay awake that night feeling like I had failed some quiet test. I took a second job at a diner 3 evenings a week. The tips helped. I rearranged the children's schedule. Noah went to an after-school program. Chloe went to a neighbor named Diane who charged me less than a daycare would because she was kind and understood the situation without me having to explain it fully. For a while, 2 jobs held things together. Not comfortably, but together. Then Frank raised the rent by $80 a month. He slid the notice under the door on a Thursday. No conversation. No warning. Just a folded piece of paper with the new amount and the date it would take effect, 30 days away. I stood in the hallway and read it twice. Then I put it on the kitchen counter and made the children's dinner and told myself I would figure it out. I figured it out by getting a third job. The third job was early mornings at a bakery 2 miles from the house. I started at 5:30 and finished at 8, which gave me just enough time to get home, wake the children, make sure they were fed and dressed, and get them to school before my bookkeeping shift started at 9. The diner was 3 evenings a week. The bakery was 5 mornings. The bookkeeping was 5 days. I had 1 full day off, Sunday, which I spent doing laundry, cleaning the house, buying groceries, and lying on the couch for 40 minutes in the afternoon while the children watched television, which was the closest thing to rest I had. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. I got a persistent headache that lived behind my right eye for 3 weeks. I started drinking more coffee than was good for me and sleeping less than my body needed. But the bills were paid. The children were fed. Noah got new shoes when his old ones wore through. Chloe had the winter coat she needed. They didn't know how close to the edge we were. I made sure of that. Frank knew, though. Not because I told him, I never told him. But he drove past the house most mornings on his way somewhere, and he had seen me leaving in the dark more than once. He had nodded from his car window. Nothing more. He knew. And he said nothing. The heating broke completely in January. It had been struggling all autumn, rooms that were never quite warm enough, a noise from the unit that I had mentioned to Frank twice in writing and once in person. He said he'd send someone. Nobody came. When it stopped working entirely on a Tuesday night in January, the temperature inside the house dropped to 50 degrees by morning. Noah slept in his coat. I put Chloe in bed with me and held her under 2 blankets. I called Frank at 7 in the morning. He didn't answer. I left a message. He texted back 2 hours later, "We'll look into it." I bought 2 space heaters that afternoon with money I had been putting aside for Chloe's birthday. I told myself I'd replace it. I kept the children in the 2 warmest rooms. I cooked extra in the evenings to keep the kitchen warm. Frank sent a repair person 8 days later. The man looked at the unit for 20 minutes and said it needed a full replacement and that Frank had been told that 6 months ago. I stood in the hallway and listened to this information and felt something harden in me. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just a slow, quiet setting of something that had been soft for too long. I took out my phone and took a photograph of everything, the broken unit, the repair person's written note, the text messages from Frank, the date. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with any of it yet. But I kept it all. The children kept me going. I want to say that clearly, because it is completely true. Noah was 7 by then. He was a serious, perceptive boy who noticed more than he let on. One morning he came into the kitchen while I was packing his lunch and said, "Mom, you look tired." Just like that. Direct and honest. I looked at him and said, "I am. But I'm okay." He thought about that for a second. Then he said, "I can make my own lunch. I know where everything is." I stood there for a moment with a piece of bread in my hand. Then I let him make his lunch. He did it carefully, sandwich, apple, a small bag of crackers. He even folded the bag shut neatly. I had to leave the room for a moment after that. Chloe was 4, and she was the kind of child who distributed affection liberally and without condition. She hugged my legs when I came home. She drew pictures for me and taped them to the refrigerator. One evening I came in from the diner at 9:30, exhausted and cold, and found a drawing on the kitchen table with Moam written across the top in large, uneven letters and a figure with long arms reaching out. I sat down and looked at it for a long time. Then I looked around the cold, drafty house that belonged to a man who didn't care whether we were warm, and I decided something. I was going to find a way out. I started researching tenant rights. I did this in the 20 minutes before the children woke up and in the evenings after they went to bed. I found a tenant advocacy organization in Columbus that offered free consultations. I called them on a Wednesday afternoon during my lunch break, standing outside the bookkeeping office in my coat. The woman I spoke to was named Patricia. She listened to the whole story, the rent increase, the heating failure, the ignored requests, the written record I had kept. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "You've actually done everything right. You documented it. You made requests in writing. You have a case." That word, case, felt unfamiliar in connection with my own life. Like something that happened to other people. Patricia explained that under Ohio tenant law, a landlord was required to maintain habitable conditions, including heat. 8 days without heating in January was a clear violation. The rent increase, combined with the documented failure to make repairs, could constitute what was called retaliatory or negligent landlord behavior. She said her organization could help me file a formal complaint with the City Housing Authority and, if I wanted, pursue a reduction in back rent to compensate for the period without heat. I stood outside in the cold with the phone against my ear and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, but the specific feeling of a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. I filed the complaint. Patricia's organization helped me prepare everything: the written record, the photographs, the repair person's note, the text messages. It was submitted to the City Housing Authority in February. An inspector was assigned within 2 weeks. The inspector came on a Thursday morning. She walked through the house with a clipboard, checked the heating unit, checked the windows, checked the water pressure. She was thorough and said very little. Before she left, she looked at me and said, "This property has several violations. You should have received notice of these from your landlord." I had received no such notice. Frank received a formal violation notice from the Housing Authority the following week. He called me the same day it arrived. His voice was different from the flat, transactional tone I had grown used to, tighter, less certain. He said he hadn't realized things had gotten that bad. I said, very calmly, "I told you about the heating in September, October, and November. I have the messages." He said he was going to fix everything immediately. I said, "I know. The Housing Authority will verify it." There was a pause. Then he said the rent increase would be reversed. I said, "I know that too." I wasn't angry when I said any of this. I was just clear. Clear in the way you become when you've spent 2 years in the dark and finally found the light switch and understand exactly where you are. The repairs were completed within 3 weeks, not because Frank had suddenly become a different person, but because the Housing Authority was watching and he had no choice. A new heating unit was installed. 2 windows that had been leaking cold air for months were properly sealed. The rent was returned to its original amount. Patricia's organization also helped me recover a partial reimbursement for the heating period, money that went straight toward replacing what I had spent on the space heaters and what I had quietly borrowed from my mother. I called my mother the evening that transfer came through. I told her everything, not just the resolution, but the whole 2 years. I had protected her from most of it because I hadn't wanted her to worry. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that honestly. "Because I was trying to prove I could manage," I said. She said, "Baby. Managing and being alone are not the same thing." I held the phone and let that sit inside me for a while. It sat deeply. I started cutting back on the extra hours after that. First the bakery mornings, I gave 2 weeks' notice and left on good terms. A month later, I reduced the diner shifts. The bookkeeping job had offered me more hours by then, and I had asked, and they had said yes. Things didn't become easy overnight. But they became possible in a way they hadn't been before. I still live in the same house on the same street in Columbus. Frank still owns it. We have a relationship that is entirely professional and kept carefully in writing, which suits both of us. The heating works. The windows are sealed. When something needs fixing, I send a message and keep a copy. He responds promptly now. People ask me sometimes what I would tell someone in the same situation, working themselves down to the bone, watching someone profit from their silence. I tell them 2 things. The first is, document everything. Every call, every message, every notice, every photograph. Not because you plan to fight, but because knowledge is the only real protection a person has when the power in a relationship is uneven. And housing is always uneven. The landlord holds the roof. You hold a pen. Use it. The second thing is harder to say and more important to hear. There is a difference between being strong and being silent. For 2 years, I mistook one for the other. I thought that handling everything alone, without complaint, without asking for help, was strength. But it wasn't. It was just loneliness wearing strength's clothes. My mother said it better than I could. Managing and being alone are not the same thing. Noah is 9 now. He still sometimes makes his own lunch. Not because he has to, because he likes to. He says it's better when he makes it himself. Chloe is 6. She still tapes drawings to the refrigerator. Last week she put up a new one. 2 figures, holding hands. Underneath, in her careful, uneven handwriting, she had written, U.S. I left it on the refrigerator. I think I'll leave it there for a long time.